Jake Morrison sat in his small ship, staring at the message on his screen. The bounty was huge. More money than he had ever seen in one job. Enough to retire and never work again. But something felt wrong. The message came from someone he did not know, no name, no picture, just coordinates and a promise of payment. The target was hiding on an old mining station on a planet called Kepler 442b. The planet was far from any trade routes. Nobody went there anymore. Jake had been a bounty hunter for 10 years. He had learned to trust his feelings. When something felt wrong, it usually was wrong. But the money was too good to ignore. His ship needed repairs. His food supplies were running low. He needed this job. He set course for the planet and tried to push away his doubts. The journey took 3 days. During that time, Jake checked his weapons and equipment. He cleaned his pistol and charged his energy cells. He studied the maps of the mining station. Something still felt off, but he could not figure out what. The planet looked dead from space. Brown and gray with no signs of life. The mining station sat on the surface like a metal spider. It had been abandoned for 20 years when the ore ran out. Now it was just empty tunnels and rusted machinery. Jake landed his ship near the station and put on his environmental suit. The air outside was thin and cold. He walked to the main entrance, his boots crunching on the frozen ground. The station's doors were open. The security systems had failed long ago. Inside, the station was dark and cold. Emergency lights flickered along the walls, casting strange shadows. Jake turned on his helmet light and moved deeper into the facility. The corridors were narrow and filled with old equipment. Pipes dripped with condensation. The air recycling system hummed weakly. He followed the coordinates from the message. They led him through a maze of tunnels and chambers. Past the old crew quarters, through the equipment storage areas, down to the lower levels where the big machines used to work. Jake's instincts screamed at him to turn back. This was a trap. He knew it now. But he was already deep inside the station. If someone was waiting for him, running might not help. He checked his pistol one more time and kept moving. The coordinates led to a large central chamber. This was where the miners used to process they dug from the planet. The room was huge, with a high ceiling and metal walkways crossing overhead. Old conveyor belts and sorting machines filled the space. Everything was covered in dust and rust. Jake stood at the entrance, studying the room. His helmet light could not reach the far corners. Anything could be hiding in the shadows. He took a step forward, then another. The floor was metal grating. That rang under his boots. As soon as he stepped into the center of the room, bright lights blazed to life. Motion sensors had detected him. Jake squinted against the sudden glare, his hand moving to his weapon. That was when he saw them. 6 figures stepped out of the shadows. They moved with the confidence of professional killers. Jake had never seen creatures like these before, but he recognized what they were. Hunters. The best in the galaxy. The first one was tall and thin, with gray skin and black eyes. It moved without making any sound, even on the metal floor. Jake had heard stories about creatures like this. They were called Thurkari. They could see in complete darkness and kill without being seen. Next to it stood something that looked like it was wearing armor, but Jake realized the armor was its skin. The creature was covered in hard plates that overlapped like scales. Its 4 arms ended in claws that could tear through steel, a Vorthan warrior. Jake had never seen one alive before. Something moved on the ceiling above him. Jake looked up and saw a creature that looked like a giant snake with arms. It coiled around the metal beams, its green scales gleaming in the light. Poison dripped from its fangs. The stories about these creatures said they could strike faster than the eye. Could follow. Near the main exit, a massive figure blocked the way. It stood 8 feet tall and had 4 arms, each holding a different weapon. Its skin was thick and bumpy like rock. Jake had heard spacers tell stories about these creatures around bars on frontier worlds. They called them Gorvaks. They were mercenaries who never lost a fight. Something that looked like a giant insect clicked its mandibles near the wall. Its compound eyes reflected the light like jewels. Jake knew this one too. A Zictal. They were connected to others of their kind across the galaxy. If you fought one, you fought them all. The last creature was the most frightening. It looked almost human, but its eyes were completely white. It stared at Jake without blinking. Jake felt pressure in his head like someone was trying to push inside his thoughts, a Mindrender. They could kill you without touching you, the tall gray one stepped forward. When it spoke, its voice was like grinding metal. Jake Morrison. It said, "You are here because you have been marked for death." Jake kept his hand near his weapon but did not draw it. "Not yet. Marked by who?" "The Galactic Hunters Guild," the creature replied. "We are the 6 greatest hunters in known space. We have been sent to eliminate you." "I never heard of any guild." Jake said, "What did I do wrong?" The creature that might have been smiling if it had been human. "You were born human. That is crime enough." Jake felt his blood turn cold. This was not about any specific bounty he had collected. This was about his entire species. "You want to kill me because I'm human?" "We want to kill you because humans have become too dangerous," the Vorthan said. Its voice was like rocks grinding together. "Your kind does not follow the rules. You do not know your place." The snake thing hissed from above. "Humans take contracts that cannot be completed. They succeed where others fail. They upset the natural order." Jake started to understand. Human bounty hunters had been too successful. They had made the established hunters look bad. Now those hunters wanted to eliminate the competition. "You chose the wrong human," Jake said, the gray one tilted its head. "We chose carefully. Your reputation precedes you. Jake Morrison. 37 successful captures. No failures. No surrenders. You are exactly the kind of human we need to eliminate." "Then why are you talking instead of shooting?" "Because," the Mindrender said, its voice echoing inside Jake's head, "we want you to understand. When word spreads that Jake Morrison died here, other humans will know to stay away from our profession." Jake looked around the room again. 6 of the deadliest hunters in the galaxy, each one specialized in killing. Each one evolved to be a perfect predator. And they had chosen the perfect place for an ambush, but they had made one mistake. They thought Jake was just another hunter who had walked into their trap. They did not understand what humans became when they stopped being the hunter and became the hunted. Jake started to laugh. The sound echoed through the chamber, bouncing off the metal walls. The alien hunters looked confused. They had expected fear, not laughter. "You know what's funny?" Jake said, still chuckling. "You think you set a trap for me. But you just made the biggest mistake of your lives." "What mistake?" the gray one asked. Jake's laughter died away. His eyes went cold. "You cornered a human." The 6 alien hunters moved closer, forming a circle around Jake. Their weapons were ready, but they did not fire yet. They wanted to talk first. Jake knew this was both good and bad. Good because he was still alive. Bad because they were confident enough to waste time. "You laugh," said the gray Thrakari, "but you do not understand your situation. We have studied your species for many months. We know how humans hunt. We know your weaknesses." Jake kept his hands visible but ready. "Really? Tell me what you learned." The armored Vorthan stepped forward. "Humans are weak. No claws, no armor, no special senses. You should be easy prey for any real hunter. And yet," the snake creature hissed from above, "you succeed where others fail. This puzzles us." The giant Gorvak spoke in a voice like breaking rocks. "We watched your kind work. We studied your methods. What we found disturbed us." Jake needed to keep them talking. Every second gave him more time to study the room and plan his escape. "What disturbed you?" The insect creature clicked its mandibles. "Other species hunt in predictable ways. They use their natural gifts. They follow patterns. That makes sense. Humans do none of these things." The Mindrender stepped closer. Its white eyes seemed to look through Jake. "We investigated many human hunters. Each one was different. Each one impossible to predict." "Give me an example," Jake said, the Thrakari. Leader began to pace. There was a human female named Kate Williams. She tracked a shapeshifter across 17 different worlds. No other hunter had ever caught one of these creatures. They can look like anyone, anything. How did she do it? Jake asked, though he already knew the story. She did not track the creature's appearance. She tracked its behavior. The shapeshifter could change its body, but it could not change its mind. It always ate the same foods. It always chose the same kind of sleeping places. It always made the same small mistakes. The Vorthan warrior nodded. No other species would have thought to track behavior instead of appearance. It was illogical, but it worked. And then there was Danny Cooper, the snake creature added. He was hired to capture a Vorthan crime lord. The criminal was protected by 50 guards. All of them were heavily armed. The crime lord lived in a fortress that had never been breached. Jake had heard this story too. Danny was something of a legend among human bounty hunters. What did he do? He did not attack the fortress, the Gorvik said. He did not try to fight the guards. Instead, he spent 3 months learning about each guard's personal life. He discovered that 20 of them were sending money to families. On their homeworld, the crime lord was stealing that money. Danny told the guards what their boss was doing, the Mindrender continued. He showed them proof. He convinced them that their loyalty was misplaced. The guards turned on their own. Dawson handed him over to Danny. The insect creature clicked again. This was not hunting. This was something else, something we had never seen before. Jake smiled. What you saw was humans being human. Explain, the Thrakari demanded. Every other species in the galaxy has natural advantages. You have night vision and stealth. The Vorthans have armor and strength. The Iskara have speed and poison. The Gorvaks have size and weapons. The Ziktal have their hive mind. The Mindrenders have telepathy. Jake looked around the circle of hunters. But humans? We don't have any of that. We're slow, weak, and soft. We can't see in the dark or read minds. We don't have poison or armor or 4 arms. This is why you should be easy to hunt, the Vorthan sighed. No, Jake replied. This is why we're impossible to hunt. Every other species relies on their natural gifts. When those gifts don't work, they're lost. But humans learn to survive without any special abilities. We learn to adapt. We learn to think our way out of problems. The snake creature coiled tighter around the ceiling beam. You use what you call creativity. We use whatever works. Jake said, if strength won't work, we use speed. If speed won't work, we use stealth. If stealth won't work, we use psychology. If psychology won't work, we use the environment. If the environment won't work, we change the environment. The Mindrender's white eyes narrowed. We discovered something else about human hunters. They share information. They work together. That's right, Jake said. When Kate Williams figured out how to track shapeshifters, she told every other human hunter. When Danny Cooper learned how to turn guards against their bosses, he taught the method to others. This is against the natural order, the Thrakari said. Hunters are solitary creatures. They keep their secrets. Humans don't think like that, Jake replied. We know that making other humans better makes all of us stronger. We're not competing with each other. We're competing with the galaxy. The Gorvek shifted its 4 weapons. Your species has begun to disrupt established criminal organizations. Syndicates that have operated for centuries are falling apart. Crime lords who thought they were untouchable are being captured, the insect added. The old ways of hiding and protecting yourself no longer work, Jake nodded. That's the idea. We're not just hunting for money. We're hunting to make the galaxy a safer place. This is why you must be stopped, the Vorthan said. You refuse to accept that some targets are impossible. You refuse to follow the rules that have kept order for millennia. What rules? Jake asked. The rules that say certain criminals cannot be touched, the Mindrender replied. The rules that say some crimes are too complex to solve. The rules that say hunters should know their limitations. Jake laughed again. Those aren't rules, those are excuses. You've been telling yourselves that some things are impossible, so you wouldn't have to try. The 6 hunters exchanged glances. They were getting angry. Jake could see it in their postures, hear it in their voices. Good. Angry enemies made mistakes. We studied your psychology, the Thrakari said. We know that humans have a weakness. You become emotional, you let feelings cloud your judgment. We also know that humans give up when the situation becomes hopeless, the Vorthan added. Your own history shows this. Humans surrender when they are outnumbered and outgunned. Jake shook his head. You studied the wrong humans. You looked at soldiers and civilians. You should have studied hunters. What is the difference? The snake creature asked. Soldiers fight for causes, civilians fight for survival, but hunters? We fight for the thrill of the impossible. We live for the moment when everyone else gives up and we keep going. The Mindrender stepped closer. You are alone, 6 against 1. You have no advantages, you cannot win. You're right, Jake said. I can't win. But I can do something else. What? Jake's smile turned cold. I can make you regret setting this trap. The Gorvak raised all 4 of its weapons. Enough talk. It is time to finish this. Wait, Jake said. I have one more question. How did you get me here? Who sent that message? The Thrakari leader tilted its head. We sent it. We knew you would come for the money, despite your suspicions. Humans are predictable in their greed. Wrong again, Jake said. I came because I knew it. Was a trap? The 6 hunters froze. This was not what they expected to hear. You see, Jake continued, I've been wondering who was targeting human hunters. When I got your message, I knew someone wanted me dead. I could have run. I could have hidden. But that's not what hunters do. Jake looked around the circle of alien predators. When someone sets a trap for a human hunter, we don't avoid the trap, we spring it. Because that's the only way to find out who's hunting us. The Mindrender's eyes went wide. You came here knowing you would die? I came here knowing one of us would die, Jake corrected. I just haven't decided which one yet. The chamber fell silent except for the hum of failing machinery. The 6 greatest hunters in the galaxy suddenly realized they might have made a terrible mistake. Jake Morrison was not a frightened human who had walked into their trap. He was a predator who had chosen his battleground. The silence in the chamber stretched like a tight wire. Jake stood in the center of the circle, surrounded by 6 of the deadliest creatures in the galaxy. But something had changed. The hunters were no longer as confident as they had been moments before. You are bluffing, the Thrakari leader said, but its voice carried a note of uncertainty. Jake shrugged. Maybe, but here's what I know about traps. The person who sets them thinks they control the situation. They choose the place, the time, the conditions, but they forget one important thing. What? The Vorthan asked. Once you spring a trap, you become part of it. You're stuck in the same box with your prey, and sometimes the prey is more dangerous than the predator. The snake creature hissed from above. You have no weapons that can harm us, no armor to protect you, no special abilities to help you escape. That's what makes this interesting, Jake said. See, you picked this place because you thought it gave you every advantage. Multiple exits you could guard, industrial equipment that would limit my movement, a setting that played to all your strengths. The Gorvak shifted its grip on its weapons. This is correct. We chose well. No, Jake said. You chose like aliens. You thought about what would help you win. But humans don't think like that. We think about what will help us survive. And survival is a very different game. Without warning, Jake dove to the side and rolled behind a large piece of mining equipment. At the same moment, he pulled out his pistol and fired 3 shots at the emergency lighting system. The chamber plunged into darkness. The Thrakari activated its night vision immediately. This was its natural advantage. It could see perfectly in the dark while the human stumbled around blind. It moved silently toward where Jake had taken cover, confident in its ability to end this quickly, but Jake was not where the Thrakari expected him to be. The human had not stayed behind the mining equipment. He had used the darkness to move to a different position entirely. While the alien hunter searched in the wrong place, Jake was already putting his plan into motion. The mining station was old, but its system still worked. Jake had studied the layout during his approach. He knew where the controls were located. More importantly, he knew how the old equipment could be turned into weapons. The first sign of trouble came when the conveyor belt system suddenly roared to life. The snake creature Iskara had been coiled around a beam directly above the main belt. She had positioned herself perfectly to strike when Jake tried to escape. But now the belt was moving, and the vibrations were making her perch unstable. Jake had not just turned on the belt. He had reversed its direction and increased its speed. The sudden change in motion caused dust and debris to fly through the air. But more importantly, it created a new kind of trap. Iskara tried to move to a safer position, but the belt's speed had increased beyond what she expected. Her coils became tangled in the moving machinery. Her lightning-fast reflexes, which had made her one of the deadliest hunters in the galaxy, were useless against the steady, inexorable pull of industrial equipment. The snake creature's hisses turned to screams as the belt pulled her down into the machinery. Jake had turned her greatest strength into her weakness. She was so fast that she could not slow down enough to escape the trap. The other hunters heard her cries and realized that the human had claimed his first victim. But they could not see what had happened. The darkness was complete except for the Thrakari's night vision. "Find him!" The Vorthan shouted. "Kill him now!" But Jake was already moving to his next target. The Gorvak was guarding the main exit, its 4 arms holding different weapons. It was confident in its ability to stop any escape attempt. But Jake was not trying to escape. He was trying to drive his enemies crazy. Small explosions began to occur throughout the chamber. Nothing big enough to cause real damage, but loud enough to be heard over the noise of the machinery. The Gorvak spun around, trying to identify the source of the sounds. It fired its weapons at shadows and noise, but hit nothing. Jake was using the mining station's old blasting system. The miners had used small charges to break up ore deposits. The system was automated, designed to detonate charges at timed intervals. Jake had reprogrammed it to create random explosions throughout the facility, but the explosions were not random. They followed a pattern that only Jake understood. Each blast was designed to push the Gorvak toward a specific area of the chamber. The 4-armed mercenary thought it was under attack from multiple enemies. It became more and more agitated, firing wildly at anything that moved. Meanwhile, the Mindrender was trying to use her telepathic abilities to locate Jake's thoughts. But she was discovering something disturbing about human minds. They did not work like other species. When she tried to read the thoughts of other creatures, she found organized, logical thinking patterns. Predators thought about hunting, prey thought about escape, soldiers thought about tactics. But Jake's mind was chaos. He was simultaneously thinking about his immediate survival, planning 17 different escape routes, analyzing the behavioral patterns of each hunter, wondering if he had enough fuel to reach the next system, and remembering a conversation he had with another hunter 3 years ago. His thoughts jumped from topic to topic with no logical connection. The Mindrender realized that human minds were not focused on single tasks. They maintained multiple thought processes at the same time. It was not that Jake was resisting her telepathic intrusion. His mind was simply too scattered for her to effectively target. While she struggled to make sense of his chaotic thoughts, Jake was putting the next part of his plan into action. He had been counting the shots fired by each hunter. The Gorvak had been firing wildly for several minutes. Its weapons had to be running low on ammunition. More importantly, Jake had been using the station's environmental systems against his enemies. The facility was old and poorly maintained. The air recycling system was failing. The temperature control was unreliable. The artificial gravity was unstable. Jake began to sabotage these systems in careful ways. He increased the temperature in some areas and decreased it in others. He created pockets of thin air and thick air. He made small adjustments to the gravity generators. The effects were subtle at first. The alien hunters began to feel uncomfortable but could not identify why. The Vorthan's armor, which had been perfectly climate-controlled, began to overheat. The insect creature's compound eyes became clouded with condensation. The Thrakari's perfect night vision began to blur as the air density changed, but Jake was not finished. He had been saving his most dangerous gambit for last. A mining station had been built to extract radioactive ore. The facility's shielding was designed to protect workers from low-level radiation exposure. But the shielding could be turned off. Jake made his way to the radiation control room. It was a small chamber filled with warning signs and safety equipment. He began to systematically disable the shielding systems. Not all of them, just enough to create a mild radiation field throughout the facility human beings could tolerate. Short-term radiation exposure better than most alien species. Jake's physiology would allow him to function normally for several hours in a low-radiation environment. But the alien hunters would begin to suffer almost immediately. The Mindrender was the first to notice the effects. Her telepathic abilities began to fade as the radiation interfered with her neural processes. The carefully organized thoughts of her prey became even more chaotic and difficult to read. The Zictal-S connection to its hive mind began to weaken. The insect creature had been relying on the collective consciousness of its species to coordinate its actions. But radiation disrupted the quantum entanglement that allowed the hive mind to function across vast distances. Jake emerged from the radiation control room to find his enemies in disarray. The Gorvak was still firing at shadows, but its movements were becoming sluggish. The Vorthan was trying to cool its overheated armor. The Thrakari was blinking rapidly, its night vision compromised by the changing air density. "You are clever," the Thrakari leader called out into the darkness. "But you cannot hide forever. We will find you." "I'm not hiding," Jake replied from somewhere in the shadows. "I'm hunting." The alien hunters realized with growing horror that the situation had completely reversed. They were no longer the predators. They had become the prey. And they were being hunted by something they did not understand, a human who refused to accept that the odds were against him, a human who turned every disadvantage into an advantage, a human who fought not with superior strength or speed or special abilities, but with the one thing that made his species unique, the absolute refusal to give up. The chamber had become a battlefield where Jake held all the advantages. The radiation was making the alien hunters sick and confused. The environmental systems were working against them. And Jake Morrison was proving why humans had earned their reputation as the galaxy's most dangerous hunters. The Vorthan warrior was suffering the most from the heat. Its armored exoskeleton, which normally regulated temperature perfectly, was becoming a metal oven. The creature was strong enough to tear through steel, but it could not tear off its own skin. Jake watched from the shadows as the Vorthan stumbled toward what it thought was a cooling station. But Jake had already been there. He had rerouted the cooling system to pump industrial solvent instead of coolant. The Vorthan activated the emergency cooling protocol and was immediately sprayed with a chemical that began eating through its armor. The creature's natural exoskeleton, which could deflect energy weapons and resist most attacks, was being dissolved from the outside in. The Vorthan screamed and tried to wash off the solvent, but Jake had also disabled the water systems in that section. The proud warrior that had bragged about its invulnerable armor was being defeated by basic chemistry. Jake moved on to his next target. The Zictal was clicking its mandibles in distress, cut off from its hive mind by the radiation. The insect creature was lost and confused. It had spent its entire life connected to the collective consciousness of its species. Now it was alone for the first time. Jake used the station's communication system to broadcast a signal on the same frequency as the Zictal-S hive mind connection. But instead of helpful guidance from its fellow insects, the creature received only static and electronic noise. The Zictal began to panic. It ran around the chamber, bumping into equipment and walls. Its compound eyes, designed to see in multiple directions at once, were filled with tears of confusion. Jake had turned the creature's greatest strength into a weakness. Without its connection to the hive, it was helpless. Jake herded the confused insect toward a section of the station where he had weakened the floor supports. When the Zictal stepped on the damaged area, it fell through into the level below. Jake sealed the opening, trapping the creature in a space that was rapidly filling with toxic gas from the mining equipment. 3 down. 3 to go. The Gorvak was still firing its weapons at random targets, but its ammunition was almost gone. More importantly, the radiation and heat were affecting its judgment. The four-armed mercenary that had once been feared across the galaxy was now shooting at its own reflection in the polished metal surfaces. Jake had spent time setting up mirrors and reflective panels throughout the chamber. In the dim emergency lighting, the Gorva could not tell the difference between real threats and reflections. It wasted its remaining ammunition on images of itself. When the creature's weapons finally ran empty, Jake made his move. He had rigged a section of the ceiling to collapse when triggered. As the Gorvak stood confused and weaponless, Jake brought down several tons of mining equipment on top of it. The creature's natural toughness, which had allowed it to survive countless battles, was useless against simple gravity and mass. The Gorvak disappeared under a pile of metal and rock. 4 down. 2 to go. Now only the Thrakari leader and the Mindrender remained. These were the most dangerous of the 6 hunters. The Thrakari was patient and skilled, a perfect assassin. The Mindrender was trying to coordinate their final assault using her weakened telepathic abilities, but Jake had been preparing for this moment throughout the entire hunt. He had deliberately exposed himself to higher levels of radiation than the others. His human physiology could handle the exposure for a short time, but the side effects were making him even more unpredictable. The radiation was interfering with his brain chemistry. His thoughts became even more chaotic and scattered. The Mindrender, who was already struggling to read his mind, found his mental patterns completely incomprehensible. To make matters worse, Jake had been using stimulants from the station's medical supplies. The combination of radiation exposure, chemical enhancement, and adrenaline turned his mind into a storm of random thoughts and impulses. The Mindrender could not find any pattern to target. The Thrakari was having its own problems. Its perfect night vision had become a liability. Jake had been using the station's emergency systems to create laser grids throughout the chamber. The beams were invisible to normal sight but blindingly bright to enhanced vision. The Thrakari found itself stumbling through a maze of light beams, unable to use its greatest advantage. Every time it tried to move silently through the darkness, it was blinded by lights that other creatures could not even see. Jake had turned the alien's superior senses against it. The creature that could see in complete darkness was being defeated by too much light. The final confrontation began when Jake deliberately triggered the station's emergency systems. Alarms blared throughout the facility. Warning lights flashed. Automated systems began shutting down non-essential functions, but most importantly, the artificial gravity began to fluctuate. The mining station had been built in sections, each with its own gravity generator. Jake had damaged several of these systems during his hunt. Now the gravity was becoming unstable. In some areas, objects fell normally. In others, they fell slowly, or drifted like they were underwater. Some sections had no gravity at all. The station was becoming a three-dimensional maze where the rules of physics changed from room to room. Jake had grown up on a space station. He was comfortable in changing gravity conditions. He could move easily between normal gravity, low gravity, and zero gravity. But the alien hunters had evolved on planets with stable gravitational fields. The Thrakari tried to use its stealth abilities, but silent movement was impossible when gravity kept changing. The creature found itself floating helplessly in sections with no gravity, or moving too slowly in areas with heavy gravity. The Mindrender was even worse off. Her telepathic abilities required concentration and focus, but the disorientation of constantly changing gravity made concentration impossible. She could not maintain the mental discipline needed for her powers to work. Jake led both surviving hunters toward the station's central core. This was where the main gravity generator was located. It was also where he had set his final trap. The core chamber was a spherical room, designed to house the massive gravity control systems. Jake had damaged the gravity generator so that it produced a zero-gravity field throughout the chamber. But he had also done something else. He had filled the room with debris from his hunt. Pieces of broken equipment, fragments of metal, and chunks of rock floated freely in the weightless environment. But they were not random. Jake had arranged them in a specific pattern. When the Thrakari and Mindrender followed him into the core chamber, they found themselves in a three-dimensional obstacle course. The debris was positioned so that any movement caused chain reactions. Touch one piece and several others would start moving. Jake moved through this floating maze like he had been born in zero gravity. He used the debris as stepping stones and shields. He pushed off from one piece to reach another. He turned the entire chamber into a weapon. The Thrakari tried to use its speed and agility, but these advantages were useless in zero gravity. Movement required different techniques and different thinking. The creature that could move like smoke on a planet was clumsy and awkward in space. The Mindrender attempted to use her telepathic abilities to control the floating debris, but the radiation and disorientation had weakened her powers too much. She could barely maintain contact with her own thoughts, let alone control external objects. Jake eliminated them both in the core chamber. Not through superior strength or advanced weapons, but through superior adaptation. He had turned an environment that should have been neutral into one that favored human versatility over alien specialization. When the gravity generator finally failed completely, Jake was the only one left alive in the chamber. The 6 greatest hunters in the galaxy had been defeated by one human who refused to accept that victory was impossible, but Jake was not finished yet. He still had a message to send. Jake floated in the zero-gravity core chamber, surrounded by the debris of his victory. 6 of the galaxy's most feared hunters were dead. The mining station was falling apart around him. Emergency systems were failing one by one. He had maybe 20 minutes before the whole facility lost life support, but Jake was not thinking about escape yet. He had something more important to do first. He pushed through the floating wreckage to reach the communication console. The system was damaged but still functional. Jake began working on the controls, his fingers moving quickly across the interface. He had learned to use alien technology during his years as a bounty hunter. Most species use similar designs for basic functions. The communication array came online with a soft hum. Jake could see the signal strength indicators. The system was powerful enough to reach the nearest relay station. From there, his message would spread across the galactic network within hours. Jake activated the recording function and began to speak. "This is Jake Morrison, human bounty hunter. Registration number 4471. I am transmitting from the abandoned mining station on Kepler 442b. If you are receiving this message, it means I survived an assassination attempt by the Galactic Hunters Guild." He paused to push away a piece of floating metal that was drifting toward the console. 6 hunters were sent to eliminate me. They called themselves the greatest predators in known space. They wanted to send a message to all human hunters. They wanted us to know our place. Jake looked around the chamber at the evidence of his fight. Broken equipment, blast marks, and the bodies of creatures that had thought themselves superior to humanity. The message they wanted to send was that humans are too dangerous to be allowed to hunt freely. They said we upset the natural order. They said we do not follow the rules. They said we succeed where others fail, and this makes us a threat. Jake smiled grimly as he continued recording. They were right about all of that. Humans are dangerous. We do upset the natural order. We do not follow rules that were made to limit us. And we do succeed where others fail. He began uploading the station's security recordings along with his message. The files showed the entire encounter from multiple angles. The ambush, the conversation, and the systematic elimination of 6 elite hunters by one human. But they were wrong about why this makes us dangerous. They thought it was because we are unpredictable. They thought it was because we use unconventional methods. They thought it was because we adapt instead of relying on natural advantages. Jake's voice became harder, more serious. Those things are true, but they miss the real point. Humans are not dangerous because we are different from other species. We are dangerous because we refuse to accept that anything is impossible. The life support system alarm began to sound. Jake ignored it and kept recording. Every other species in the galaxy has learned to accept limitations. They know what they can and cannot do. They follow established patterns. They respect boundaries that have existed for thousands of years. But humans? We look at those same boundaries and ask why they exist. We see limitations and try to overcome them. We find impossible situations and treat them as interesting puzzles. Jake began making his way toward the escape pods while continuing to record. The station was shaking now as systems failed throughout the facility. The 6 hunters who tried to kill me thought they had set the perfect trap. They chose their battlefield carefully. They used their natural advantages. They followed proven tactics. They did everything right according to the established rules of hunting. And they all died because they could not understand that humans do not play by those rules. Jake reached the escape pod bay. 3 pods were still functional. He chose the one with the best navigation system and began the startup sequence. I want every criminal in the galaxy to hear this message. I want every crime lord, every syndicate boss, every corrupt official to understand what happened here today. 6 of the deadliest hunters in known space tried to eliminate 1 human. They had every advantage. They chose the battlefield. They had superior numbers, superior weapons, and superior abilities. And they still lost. Jake sealed himself into the escape pod as the recording continued. The pod systems activated, preparing for launch. This is what happens when you underestimate humanity. This is what happens when you think we will accept our limitations. This is what happens when you believe that some things are impossible. We prove you wrong. The escape pod launched just as the mining station's main power core failed. Jake watched through the viewport as the facility collapsed in on itself, taking with it the evidence of the greatest hunting failure in galactic history. But the message was already spreading. To any human hunters receiving this transmission, remember what you learned here today. The galaxy thinks we are dangerous because we are unpredictable. The galaxy thinks we are threats because we succeed where others fail. They are right to think these things. But they do not understand the real reason. We are not dangerous because we are superior. We are dangerous because we refuse to accept that we are inferior. Jake ended the recording and began transmitting it on all available frequencies. The message would reach every corner of known space within a day. Every species would hear it. Every government would analyze it. Every criminal organization would debate its implications, but most importantly, every human hunter would understand its true meaning. The response began almost immediately. Jake's communication system lit up with incoming messages. Some were from human hunters expressing support. Others were from alien authorities demanding explanations. A few were from criminal organizations withdrawing bounties on human targets. But the most interesting responses came from potential clients. Jake received 17 new bounty contracts before his escape pod even reached the nearest space station. Word was already spreading that if you wanted something impossible accomplished, you hired a human. 3 days later, Jake docked at Frontier Station Alpha. News of his survival had preceded him. The station's cantina was packed with hunters, merchants, and spacers who wanted to see the human who had defeated 6 elite aliens in single combat. Jake walked through the crowd to the bar. Conversation stopped as people recognized him. Alien hunters who had once looked down on humans now stepped aside respectfully. Criminal contacts who had once ignored human bounty hunters now approached with lucrative offers. The bartender, a grizzled Centaurian veteran, served Jake a drink without being asked. "So," the alien said in accented standard, "I hear you had some trouble on Kepler 442b. Jake took a sip of his drink and looked around the cantina. He could see fear in some faces, respect in others, and calculation in many. The galaxy had received his message loud and clear. "No trouble," Jake replied calmly. "Just sent a message." "What kind of message?" Jake finished his drink and stood up. He had work to do. 17 new contracts were waiting for him, and the galaxy was full of criminals who thought they were untouchable. "The kind that changes everything," Jake said. He walked out of the cantina and toward his ship. Behind him, the conversations resumed, but they were different now. The topics had changed. People were talking about human hunters with new respect, new fear, and new understanding. Jake Morrison had walked into a room full of elite alien hunters and walked out alone. But more than that, he had walked out carrying the reputation of his entire species. Humans were no longer seen as inferior hunters trying to compete with their betters. They were recognized as the galaxy's apex predators. Not because they were stronger or faster or more naturally gifted than other species, but because they were the only species that refused to believe that anything was truly impossible. And in a galaxy full of impossible things that made them the most dangerous hunters of all.